there's a lot of ground to cover, and I'm going to record this webinar, so if you don't catch everything the first time, you'll be able to rewatch it. I'll send you a link to this webinar, and you can watch it at your leisure a second or third time if you like. Also, there's a lot to cover, but don't be intimidated by it. Once you've worked with this a couple of times, you'll be able to do it in your sleep. We've got users that have used this for years and like it, and they're very, very good at it, but they started out like you did, kind of all thumbs at first, but we try to get you up to speed pretty quickly. So what you see here now is just my desktop. It'll look similar to your desktop. When the weekly work scheduler is installed, you're going to have a folder on your desktop that's called weekly work schedule files. It'll be orange like this, and in that folder will be all of the program, all of the spreadsheets that are used in the weekly work scheduler. You notice I have a few of them in here. Some of these are actual stored data. Others are just test files. But what you'll wind up having over time is a history of all of your work schedules. You can organize them into folders if you like, so that this directory doesn't get so cluttered up.
Mike?
with yes.
I don't know if it's anywhere else, but ours is very small. Is that something you can make bigger, or should we try to do it here?
Do you have a?
Letters are very small.
Well, are you able to read any of the writing on the screen, like where it says weekly work schedule 122?
Not much at all.
Okay, I'm just gonna launch one of these workbooks and see if that makes things a little larger. So I'm just launching one of the work schedules right now. It takes a moment for it to load and open up. This work schedule is full of sample data. It's not real live data. It's fictitious employees and so forth to protect the innocent, I guess. Let me let this come all the way up. Is that any better, or do you need it even larger?
I don't. Mine's. You can't even read mine.
Okay. Do you have a real small monitor?
Mm-mm.
All right. Give me a second. I just got to let this initialize. See if I can make my screen a little bit larger for you. Still initialized, and once it's initialized, then you get a splash screen, and that means the program is ready. So this splash screen just came up, so it's ready. So give me 1 minute here, and let's see if I can get this screen a little larger. All right. Any improvement?
That was a little better.
Looks a little better.
All right, let's see if I'll make it a little larger.
Don't get out here.
See if that's any better. All right, hold on a second here. All right. I'm going to just log into the program here real quick. There's a couple other things I can do to get the screen larger. Any better?
Oh yeah, now I can read it.
Yep.
All right, wonderful. Just close this window here to get it out of my way. And close this window to get it out of my way. All right, very good. Okay, so what I've done is I've just opened up the weekly work scheduler, and I've logged in. For security purposes, there are logins, and when we roll this software out in your stores, we'll have individual logins, and I'll kind of walk you through how that all works when I install it at your stores. But what I'd like to do here is just kind of show you the lay of the land of what you see on your screen once you're logged in. At the top, are you able to read the very top where it has a bunch of buttons?
Not much of it, but yeah.
Okay, well, at the very top is our two toolbars. One is for scheduling, one is for administration. You can click on one or the other, and that will change the buttons that are at the top. Some of the buttons you're going to use a lot. Some of you're not going to use it very often at all. We'll get into the important ones here in a little bit. And the majority of your screen is going to be composed of your employees and the schedule itself. You can have up to 92 employees. Wouldn't that be nice? But you can have up to 92 employees, and they're in sequential order. You can see down the left-hand side, you'll see their names. You'll see a bunch of other symbols. We'll get into all of that. Across the page, then you'll have your days of the week, and depending on when your day of the week starts, the first day here at this particular group of fictitious employees, their week starts on Tuesday, but you can start any day of the week, and that's totally configurable in the program. So you'll have your days of the week across the top, then your date that your schedule is being put together for, and then these times here, like 6 a.m. to 11 p.m., those are your store hours when you're open and closed for business. And then the employee information repeats itself on the schedule. As I scroll down, as you can see, there are multiple employees that are listed and are being scheduled. There are 2 slots for each employee. One is for an in time, start time. One is for an end time. Then there's a slot for what we call jobs. We'll get into those later. And then also the total number of hours that are scheduled for that particular shift. I'm going to scroll across because you can't see the entire screen since I've enlarged it. As you can see, it continues on until you get to the end of the week, and then you have a couple of more areas. Whoops, it scrolled by. There it is. A couple more areas. At the end of the line for each employee, there's an area called split shifts. We'll get into split shifts. And then total hours scheduled for the employee itself. You'll also see there's some colors on their timeline. And a green indicates that it's an opening shift. Anytime you schedule an employee before your published opening time, which is 6 a.m., and on this particular day, so if somebody arrives for work at 5 a.m., that will turn green. It's just a visual clue to you that you've got an opener scheduled. Conversely, closing shifts, if somebody's working a closing shift, that shift turns red. As you can see in the second line, there are some closing shifts, and those turn red. You also have kind of a maroon color, and that's for anybody that has requested time off. And there's also a yellow color. I have some on here on the timeline. And those are for just they're not working. It's either you've scheduled them off. There's 2 ways that you can schedule people. You can schedule them off, or you can just leave their shift blank, meaning that they're not working. Some people like to use the off function, and we'll get into that as well. At the bottom of the screen, I'm going to scroll all the way down because we're just kind of going over kind of the lay of the land here. At the bottom of the screen and there are shortcut keys we'll get to later, but at the very bottom, you'll see that there's kind of a summary area. Okay, here we go. And once we're past employee 92, there's a summary area, and that consists of shifts that are scheduled for peak periods. It counts up the number of people that you have for your peak periods. let's say peak period breakfast is from 7 to 9, and from lunch is 11 to 1, and dinner is 5 to 8. You can set that yourself, and we'll show you that later. But it will tally up that information for you. And it's, for instance, here on Tuesday, right now I have 2 breakfast people scheduled, 6 over lunch, and 8 over dinner. I have 1 opener, and I have 2 closers. This is not by any means a complete schedule. It's a schedule in progress, but it gives you a snapshot of what you have scheduled already for that employee, for that store for that day. You'll notice also at the very top of the schedule there's a gray area. That's a duplication of your summary so that you don't always have to scroll to the bottom. So you can see here, breakfast 2, lunch 6, dinner 8, open 1, close 2, total scheduled hours 54. So it duplicates at the top what you see here at the bottom. Then this next area is a forecasting area. This is actual live sales data from an actual restaurant that is using their sales information. And since you guys are on PPP, Bob, you'll have this available to you in the work scheduler, which is really comes in really handy when doing your sales forecasting. And this basically shows you your last year's same week sales. This year, a 6-week average for the last 6 weeks. This year, a 3-week average. And this year, what last week's sales are, and then what the store is forecasting for the upcoming week. So maybe there's a promotion going on. I have your payroll chart. So what it's going to do is going to look at the forecast that you have, calculate the hours that are allowed, and dollars that are allowed and hours that are allowed. And then based on how you've scheduled, it will tell you whether or not you're making your labor goals. So this is just kind of the lay of the land in terms of what's all on this worksheet. Let's get into a couple other things here. One is, if you notice that I made the screen a little bit bigger, and depending on your monitor, you can do this yourself. All you have to do is just use your mouse. If you have a wheel on your mouse, you take your keyboard and you hold down the control key and you scroll your mouse. And when you scroll your mouse, you can either zoom in or you can zoom out. So you can make it as small as you want or you can make it as large as you want. Those that have large monitors tend to, obviously get more information on their screen. All right, so where's all this stuff coming from? Where are all these hours coming from? Where are all these employees coming from? Well, the employees, there's an area that will set up employees, and we'll do that just a little bit later. But the hours themselves are entered by you, and there's a multitude of ways that you can enter hours. One way, what we call the classic way, is you click on the employee in time. Here's Mark M. And you'll see there's a little drop-down arrow. Well, you can use that drop-down arrow to select a starting time. You can select a request off. You can select the employees off, or you can select any starting time. For instance, let's schedule another opener. So I'll click 5 a.m. Notice how that turned green because that employee is coming in before the opening time of the store, so it's an opener. And let's just go on and let's click ending time, and I'll just select 1 o'clock, and that employee now has a 5 to 1 shift scheduled and a 7.5 hour shift. Now, Bob, do you guys pay for breaks, or are they unpaid breaks?
Unpaid breaks.
Okay. Well, in this particular example is the same thing. It's an unpaid break. As you can see, a 5 a.m. to 1 p.m. shift is 8 hours, but because it's an there's a 30-minute unpaid break in there, it automatically deducted 30 minutes to keep your payroll guidelines accurate. There are ways that you can pay people for breaks or account for paid breaks. That's what these little blue buttons are for. Let's just say that perhaps Mark is a shift leader and he can't leave the store and he's running the shift. Some groups pay that person for their break. I click that. Well, he's not a shift leader, so I can't click him. Let me find one. it has to be a management person. Here, Sally, for instance. You notice right here, I click the button for Sally. She's a shift supervisor, and I paid her for her break, or I accounted for that paid break on the schedule by clicking this blue button. If I uncheck this blue button, then notice that I deduct a half an hour from your shift because she's not being paid for a break. So some franchise groups pay for their breaks. There's a setting in the program that you can select paid breaks, and then those buttons don't work at all. Let me go back down. So that's one way that you can enter a shift for an employee. It's probably the slowest way of doing that, but for oddball shifts, it's a very easy way to do that. There's a much faster way. There's several faster ways to enter shifts. We have Bill here. Let's look at Bill, for example. And one of the features that we have is called point and click with predefined shifts. And there's at the top of the very top of the toolbar, there is an area called point and click. So I turn that on, and it's called, now it should be enabled. And now I can select a shift. And I have some predefined shifts here. I'm hoping that you can kind of see those. Can you see those predefined shifts?
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah. So there's like 5 to 1 and 8 to 2, and you can define up to 20 different shifts, common shifts. Okay. So I'm just gonna select a 7 to 3 shift. Okay. And now what I can do, and this only works when you click on the employee's in time. So if I click on his in time, that 7 to 3 shift now populates by itself. Okay, and let's say he works 7 to 3 also on another day here on Wednesday. So I click again, and it populates 7 to 3. So I can go around the schedule and fill in all my 7 to 3s just by clicking on in times. I don't have to go, select each individual drop-down time. If I want a different shift, I come back up here, and I select, let's say, a 9 to 4, and now I can just click on the in time, and now I get the 9 to 4 shift automatically populating to the timeline. So that's a quicker way of populating shifts. There's even a faster way, believe it or not. And again, you won't be able to see this maybe on your toolbar. There's a little arrow right here under point and click. If I click that, I get a floating window, and I apologize that it's a little small. It'll be much more readable on your screen when you actually run the program. I think it has to do with my laptop and the fact that we're using a webinar format. But those are what you see on here, or what you should be able to see on here, are all of the predefined shifts that we have set up. And what I can do now is I can just simply, I'm going to use the click button. I can just simply click on one of these shifts. It turns red, meaning I've selected it, and I can now go to the timeline and click on end times, and it'll populate. And then if I want to select a different shift, I come back up here, maybe a 6 to 2, I come up here and I click it, click, and now I can populate the 6 to 2 shift. So when you start using this predefined floating window, selecting and populating shifts becomes very quick, and you can fill out a schedule very, very quickly. So there are a couple of other ways of populating shifts, and that's using your mouse and using the right-click buttons. If I right-click, I can copy the previous day's hours. I can copy hours to the next day. I can copy hours to the remaining day of the week. It's kind of left over from what we call the classic way of entering hours. Probably doesn't get a whole lot of use, but you can play around with it if you like. So there's a number of ways that you can actually enter hours onto a timeline. All right. There's also what we call jobs, and it's an optional feature. If you want to indicate jobs on a timeline, right now I have two jobs defined. One is cashier, one is cook. You can select it, and it will now say cashier on that timeline. You can define up to 7 different jobs. So if you have a host or a hostess, if you have a maintenance person, if you have a baker, those can all be defined in the program. And we're not getting into defining things just yet. We're just talking about how do we get stuff onto the, onto the timeline. All right. You probably noticed there's some other buttons and things on this timeline. Let's look at this button right here. This is a lock button, and each employee has a button on their timeline for locking their hours. And where that comes in very handy is if you've got a regular crew, typically your day crew, you've got 4 or 5 people, they work the same hours week after week after week. Well, rather than clearing the schedule when we start a new schedule and having to re-enter that person's hours, on the timeline, before we clear the schedule, we click the lock button, it turns red, and that indicates that employee's hours are locked. So you can lock, the 5, 6, 8 employees that you have that have the same schedule, and then clear your schedule when you start a new schedule, and those hours will not clear from the timeline. And that saves you quite a bit of time. There's also what you see here is it looks like a folder, okay? And that folder has to do with what we call the employee's availability. You can set up a profile for an employee that says this employee can work only on these days for these hours, can only work this many hours during the week, can't work weekends. And once you set that profile, when you do your schedule, if you violate that profile, you'll be told about it. So this prevents the publishing schedule and then the employee coming to you 3 days later and saying, well, I told you I can't work on Tuesdays past 2 o'clock. And then you scramble to try to fill the hours. This prevents that from happening before the schedule is even published. And these folders have 3 colors. They're green, yellow, and red. Green basically just says there's no restrictions. The employee doesn't have, there's no profile set up for this employee, so schedule what you will. Red indicates that there is a profile for that employee. And yellow, which you won't see a lot, but yellow means there is a profile, but currently it is turned off, meaning maybe the profile is only good during school year, but when school's out in the summer, the profile doesn't apply. You can turn the profile off, and then it won't be enforced. So if I click on one of these red ones, here, Mary O, employee 3, if I click on it, on the timeline underneath the hours, it will populate what the profile consists of. And you can see Mary can work from 7 to 7, looks like every day of the week. And Jeff can work from 8 to 8, 7 to 5. So this profile will show up underneath their hours if you want that profile to be seen. And where that comes in handy is when you have somebody new taking over the schedule. They don't really know what everybody can work. Well, they can just click on those folders and they can at a glance see what their restrictions are, so they don't incorrectly schedule that employee. Now here, under Mark, he also has a profile, and I'm going to click his profile so we can take a look at it. And what you'll see here is on Mark's, give me 1 second here. What you see here is that Mark is coming in at 5 a.m., but his profile says he can only work 7 to 7, so he's coming in before 5. You see a little flag here. That little flag basically is a heads up to you that says, hey, there's something wrong here. You've violated this employee's work profile for the in time. So it's giving you a warning. There are other places later you'll see where you'll be warned about that. But you can, in real time, as you're doing that person's schedule, see that if you have profiles set up, hey, there's something amiss. Giving you a heads up to correct it now or later, but it's obviously easier to correct that now. So that's what these folders are for, is for employee availabilities. Then you'll also see these little symbols here, like Adam. You'll see a ribbon and you see an apron. These indicate what the capability of that employee is. So if you define cashier and cook as specific jobs, you can certify that Adam can work either cashier or cook. So again, when somebody's doing the schedule, if they're not familiar with all the employees, they can see these symbols below the timeline, and once they understand what these symbols mean, then they know that, if there's no apron there, then I probably shouldn't count on Adam to be working the kitchen. All little visual clues to help the person when they're doing the schedule. Any questions so far?
Nope. Nope.
Wonderful. All right, I'm just going off my checklist here. Okay, so let's take a look at just the predefined shifts. Where do they come from? Well, on the toolbar under Administration, there is a button called Tools. So if I click on that Tools, I get a menu of tools. There's a lot of tools and a lot of different things. Again, when you're just starting out, you're not going to use 90% of this. But one of the functions on here is called Setup Predefined Shifts / Jobs. So if I select that and I click OK, I get another window that shows me, it's either going to be blank in case when you're just starting out, or it's going to show me all the predefined shifts I have set up. As I said, that there are 20 of them that you can set up. They're very simple. You have these little arrows down here, and you can just click on them. Let's say you want to set up a 7 to maybe just a simple 7 a.m. You can hold the button down too. 7 a.m. to 11 a.m. Okay, and you can save that. And that 7 to 11 a.m. shift is now available to you under predefined shifts. There's another tab up here called Jobs. You can enter, I'm sorry, I might have said 7. There's 6 jobs that you can enter. And I have, by default, a cashier and a cook. But if I wanted to add a, let's just call it drive-through, you can select whatever symbol you want to use. I happen to have a headset here, so I'll just use the headset. If you have a baker, you can have a baker, and why don't we use that hat for the baker? All right, so you can apply that. All right. Just waiting for it to finish. And my mouse moves a little slow because I'm on what's called a virtual machine. All right, so notice now when I click under Jobs, I have cashier, cook, drive-through, and baker available to me. So that is where the predefined shifts and jobs come from. It's under Tools, and in Tools you have a function called Setup Predefined Shifts and Jobs. All right. The other thing below a timeline, you notice that here, for instance, we have the availability. But what this blank space is really used for, other than showing you the availability if you so choose, is for information. Maybe you want to type something in here like train new hire. Okay, these are just comments that you can put in. Here we have a train new hire. Here we have do food order. You can type whatever you want in these boxes, and it will print on the schedule so that it's a reminder of something that might need to take place. Maybe it's rejuvenate the fryers. But it's there for your use. There's no restrictions on what you can do with that. So, well, how can we have 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. on here and comments? Well, I'm going to show you how that works. So when I have, I'm going to just type in rejuvenate vats. So when I have that comment in there, if I also have a availability that I want on that timeline, when I click that folder, so my availability is now showing. Bear with me, my computer runs a little slow. But when I uncheck that folder, Rejuvenate Vats comes back. It's back on the screen. Yeah, bear with me here. Virtual machine. Virtual machine basically is, I'm running on a Mac laptop and my software runs on Windows. So I'm running Windows inside of the Mac. So things run a little slow sometimes, so I apologize. Okay, let's talk about the employees and where do all these employees come from? Well, there's a button on the top of the administration toolbar, and this is an area that you'll be using a lot. It's called the Data Manager. I'm going to click on the Data Manager, and you're going to get a window, and this is where you set up your employees. If you have no employees set up, or when you first launch the Data Manager, you'll get a blank area to fill in the information for your employees. So there's an area that's divided into really 3 sections. It's called the Quick Start information, and that's basically the employee's name, their date of birth, their hourly wage, what position that they should be working. We call it the job code. And then once that's filled in, then you have additional areas. You have a second area down here called communication info. Communication info is for when you publish the schedule, you will have the ability to text your employees with their personal copy of their schedule when the schedule is ready and published. Or you can email the employee their personal copy of the work schedule when that schedule is published. So in the communication area, you basically indicate how the employee would like to receive their schedule. There's 3 options: via text message, via email, or print only. And print only basically means the employee just looks at the schedule on the bulletin board when he or she is at work. You can, if you define it as text, then there's an area where you put their cell phone number. If you define it as email, then you can enter their email address. And this, when you publish the schedule, the employee will automatically then receive via email a copy of their schedule. And it's a copy of their schedule only, not the entire schedule for the store, but their schedule only. Then there's an area down below. It's called HR info, data for office. Here you can enter their social security number, which by the way is encrypted, so it will not be exposed, and their address, city, withholding, all that kind of information, which can be used to send to a central office. If you do payroll at a central office, it'll send a sheet, which is also password protected, to a central office that they'll have all that new hire information. They can then add them to their payroll software. It's optional. It does not have to be used. If you do use it, if you do start to enter something for an employee in this area, you have to finish it. You can't just enter one, like their address, and then not enter all the other information. It has to all be entered together. So 3 areas. The top area is mandatory. The middle area is optional. If you don't select the text, print only will be selected by default for the schedule publishing, and the bottom area again is optional. Then there's some additional tabs which are grayed out right now because we haven't set up any employee on this sheet yet. If I click on the employee number drop-down, you can see all the employees that have already been set up at the store. And then anywhere where there's a blank is a spot where that you can add another employee. So I'm just going to pull up an existing employee. How about Jeff Lettuce? We'll pull him up. If I select that, all of his information now will populate. Okay, as you can see, for Jeff, we have the required information set up, and we have print only set up for communication info for how they'll receive their schedule, and then basically nothing else set up under the HR info, since we're not tracking any HR for this employee. But all the other tabs are now available to us, okay? So if I click on the tab called Request Off, basically, if you could picture your request off envelope, years past, we always had an envelope where all the notes from the crew members were in that envelope asking for time off. And then when we start the schedule, we pull out the 50 notes that are in the envelope, and then we look to see which notes apply to the schedule that we're currently working on and make sure that we write off on the schedule. Well, you don't have to do that anymore. When you get those requests off, you can basically just enter those into these employee request off areas. So for instance, for Jeff, I'm going to just enter since we're on the week of 122, I'll just enter 122, 2019. And then the reason is optional, but it's always good to to enter a reason, and I'll show you in a minute why that is. And I'll just say doctor appointment. Okay. And I'll save that request off. Whoops. Date is older than current schedule. What did I do here? No. The program is too smart for its own good. Bear with me a second. Today is the 29th, and I'm working on the 22nd. So the program says, well, wait a minute. How's that going to work? 1 second. I'm going to change the schedule date. So there's a schedule calendar. I'm going to click it, and then I'm going to say, all right, we're going to work on the schedule for February 5th. I'm going to let the program change that. It's going out to the cloud and updating sales history because we've changed weeks. Takes a second. Slow internet today, I think. All right, I'm going to go back into the data manager now. All right, and I think it was Jeff we were working on. Wow, virtual machines are slow. All right. And let's select 2-6. Hello. There we go. 2-6. (2019) and doctor appointment. All right, let's save that. And he could have other days off too. There may be a whole variety of days off requests. You can have up to 14 individual days into the future that you can set up for an employee. And the program will do its own housekeeping. So if a day is come and gone, it will remove that from this tab. So you can enter 14 individual days on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, you can enter up to 8 blocks of time. Somebody wants a week off for vacation or 10 days. You can enter the first date, the last date, and the reason, and the program will keep track of that time off for that employee. And I'll show you here in a bit where this 2.6 will come into play. Another tab that you have, we talked about availability. Well, this is where it comes from. On this tab, you can set the availability for the employee. And each day of the week down the left, and then there's an earliest start time, a latest end time, and then you have these arrow buttons here that you can select the start time and end time in 15-minute increments. And you can do that for each day of the week. And then you've got some check boxes on the right-hand side that are either same as previous day, so you don't have to repeat selecting them. If it's the same, you can just click the checkbox, same as previous day, and it'll automatically change that to the same availability from the day before. Or can't work at all, which is the right-hand checkbox. If you select that, for instance, here I'll select that, and it changes to can't work at all. On the right-hand side is number of hours limits. So this is starting and ending time on the left. On the right is number of hours. So you have hours per week, you have hours per shift during a weekday, and hours per shift on a weekend. And there's a minimum and a maximum. So if Jeff requires a minimum of 12 hours a week, then you can enter that in there, and the program will let you know that, hey, you only scheduled Jeff 8 hours this week. That's below what you told me that he needs to make it worth his while to work. You can also have a maximum hours per week, so if he can't work more than 20 hours, you can enter that in there. If you violate that, the program will let you know that. Then there's hours per shift. There's some people that live in the country that maybe they'll drive 12 miles to come to work, but they're going to, usually they'll say, hey, if you schedule me more or less than 3 hours or 4 hours, it's not my time, worth my time to drive 12 miles. So you can put minimum required and also maximum. Some people can't, be working more than 6 hours in a day. You can put the maximum in there as well. Again, those are just there to remind you if there is a restriction that if you've violated that restriction, you'll catch it before you publish the schedule. The minimum and maximum hours per shift, you can break those out for weekday and weekend. Some people can work more or less on weekends versus weekday. So it's optional. You don't have to use any of it, but you can use that to help with making sure that you're not violating a requirement of that employee. And you'll also see there's a checkbox up here that says profile is active. And this is where I had mentioned that there may be an employee who works a different schedule in the summer versus during the school. You can have a profile and uncheck this box, and it's still there, but it's not being enforced. That makes the folder yellow over here. And if it's checked, that makes the folder red. And if there's nothing in here, the folder is green, of course, because there's no profile set up. 2 more tabs. Again, they're optional. People use them, and they're very handy. One is attendance. You can track employee attendance. So if Jeff comes in late habitually, you can document that, and when it comes time for a review or discipline, you have a record of it. And it's very simple to use. You select the month, and it always defaults to the month that you're currently in, and then you have some attendance code. Maybe you can't read these, but there's V for vacation, N for no-show, S for sick, T for tardy, E for excused absence, and U for unexcused absence. So if Jeff, let's say on the 17th, he was tardy, I just hit the letter T, and the T pops up under the 17th in yellow, indicating that he was tardy. Now, maybe 6 months from now when you do a review, you may not remember how tardy he was. You can double click on the T and you get a window and you can now type in Jeff was 45 minutes late today. And now you have a record of that. And you'll be able to print out that history at any time when the employee terminates, or if you take discipline, or you're just doing a performance review. You'll be able to present that employee with his attendance, especially if it's an issue. The other tab is called documentation. It works kind of like, almost exactly like attendance, but this is documentation for things like coaching, behavior problems, performance problems, warning, even good things like help cover a shift, or if he gave away a shift. So, for instance, let's say on the 18th I hit H, and the window pops up right away because it's documentation. Well, without documentation, you don't really have anything, so that's why the window pops up right away to force you to enter some documentation. Well, I selected H for help cover shift. I'm going to say Jeff covered a 5 to 7, bailing us out today. So that's an attaboy that you can keep track of, again, for performance reviews, but also if you're giving somebody a warning, or if somebody habitually gives away their shifts, you'll have a record of it when they confront you and ask, well, how come you're only scheduling me 6 hours? Well, you always give away your shifts. Here's the days you've done that. So that's a little bit of the HR part of this. Attendance and documentation you can keep track of if you so choose. Some people use that. A lot of people use it. Some people don't. It's really up to you. And maybe you don't start out using it, but down the road, I would encourage you to use it. It's a very, very handy feature. So this is where the data comes from for your new hires. Each new hire has its own spot in the employee data card, and it has all of their pertinent information, their availability, their request time off, attendance, and documentation. I'm going to go back to this first page here real quick, because you see here an area called training status. This is how the symbols below their name come about. Whatever you have checked here then will become available to you in this under their timeline. So here, this is Jeff, and we have cashier and cook, and notice now we have drive-thru and baker because we added those. If I add baker, let's just check baker here, training status updated, and if you look under Jeff, the little baker's hat just popped up. So this is how this information comes to the timeline under their name. It's basically right here in the data manager under training status. All right. All right, I mentioned that you can also have split shifts. You know, this day and age, it's tough to get help, and a lot of stores run short, and sometimes we need to have the ability to have them work maybe a couple of times during the day. Well, the program can accommodate that, and it's really very simple to do. There's just a couple of caveats for working a split shift. The position of the employee on the schedule has to be at an odd-numbered space, and the space below the employee has to be free. Now, if they're not, employees can be moved around, and I'll show you how to do that here in a minute. I'm just looking for a odd-numbered spot with, there we go, I think, right here. Employee 27 is in an odd-numbered spot, and there's no one below 27. So if I want this employee to be able to work a split shift, I'm going to come over here, scroll to the right, and I'm going to check the box under split shift. Okay? And what will happen now is that employee will have two entries on line 27 and on line 28. Notice 27 and then 28 kind of has a line through it and it says split. So now you have 2 spots that you can schedule that employee. So I'm just gonna grab a couple of shifts real quick. Let's do a 8. We'll do an 8 to 1. And then we're short at night, so employee is going to come back and work supper hour for us to help us out. So now I'm going to pick the 5. Hello. Again, because I'm on a virtual machine, it runs a little slow. It won't run this slow on your computer, trust me. 5 to 7, okay? So I've got 2 shifts here. And if I go over to the right, back to where I selected the split shift, what you'll see is 6.5 hours. So that the hours for the week are consolidated for both timelines for that employee. Since we've only scheduled them one day, we're at 6.5 hours. So that is how you get the employees on a split shift. If you no longer need the split shift, you can uncheck the box, and then that second line will be erased. All right, let's talk about. As I mentioned, that you need to have a odd numbered location, and you need to have a empty spot. Well, how do we move employees on the schedule? Let's find one here. There's a function right on the toolbar called Move Employee. So why don't we, let's find a spot here. Why don't we move Sarah? She's at spot 32. And let's move her to spot 31. So under Data, on the admin bar, there's called Move Employee. You'll get a window that says enter the location to move from 32, and I want to move the employee to 31. I click OK, and then the program will move the employee, and it'll be he or she will be at 31 as if they've always had been there. So everything associated with that employee gets moved to 31. If the employee had hours on the schedule, those hours will move right along with the employee. Amy here in this case didn't have any hours, but had she had hours, that would move right along with her. So you can move individual. I'm sorry, it wasn't Amy. It was. She's finishing here. Move completed. It was Sarah. So you can move an individual employee. You can also move, there's another button next to it called Move Group of Employees. So if you want to move group employees 5 through 9 to position 14 through 16, if the spots are open, the entire group will get moved. So you can move at your employees at your heart's content. Typically, the structure of how you set up employees on here, the first 10 spots are the spots that have these little blue buttons, which are paid break buttons. So typically, you want to make sure that you have any management folks that you may wind up paying for their breaks in those first 10 positions. There are typically you put the GM in spot 1 and the assistant in spot 2 and supervisors down and so forth. All right, so that's kind of where the employees come from. Now, the schedule is done, and we're ready to kind of finalize the schedule. So how do we go about finalizing and publishing the schedule? Well, there's one thing that's critical that you have to do, and is the reason why we go through a lot of the setting up profiles and setting up request off and making sure that we don't violate any of those things is because there's a function on here called audit. Before you can publish the schedule, you have to audit the schedule. It will not allow you to publish the schedule until audit has completed and is completed successfully. So there's a button here on the admin toolbar called Audit. I click on Audit, and these little reminders come up. It's called a save reminder. They come up periodically, suggesting that you save your schedule. If you work a long time on your schedule and don't save it, and your computer has a hiccup, something happens, power blip, whatever, and the schedule crashes because your computer crashed, well, you lose all that work. So it reminds you, hey, you haven't saved for a while. You know, maybe you should think about saving your schedule. So you can click on Save Now, oh no, remind me later, or no, I want to change the setting, or hey, stop nagging me. You can choose any of those. And there, you can change the setting for how often you get nagged about this in the software itself. But I'm just going to say, no, remind me later. Okay, he says, I'll make a note of it. So, audit is in progress. So now it's auditing. Oops, it found something. It's saying, Jeff Lettuce requested off 2/6/2019. If you recall, we entered that information. So you do have the ability to override this. Maybe Jeff said, hey, never mind, and you forgot to remove it. I don't need it off. You can override this just by clicking yes. But if you click no, then audit will stop and allow you to correct that error. So I'm going to click no. And Jeff did request that off. I'm just going to delete the shift by pushing the delete button. Come on, go away. There we go. All right, and then I can run audit again. Let's see if we made any other mistakes. Oh, we did. Mark Mustard. Violation, starting time. So obviously he has a profile and we violated that. I'm going to ignore that and override it because he said it was okay. All right. Audit is still auditing. Now it's finished. How do I know when audit is done? Audit is done when you get this additional page here. This is your audit. So you've now fixed all of your violations. And what you're presented with now is a breakdown of what you have scheduled in terms of bodies in 15-minute increments. So you can take a quick look. Maybe you're way over on hours. Well, where am I heavy on hours? Well, you can look through here and you can see maybe you're heavy on Friday and lunchtime. You have 11 people on. Maybe that's too many. So you're able to see that at a glance for the entire week in 15-minute increments. You'll see that there's some other symbols on here. On the far left side, there's a, if you can't read it, it's in red. It's like, it says 2. That's minimum employees that you've said that you want on shift at any time during the day. And if it falls below that, you'll see a red arrow that says, hey, you are below what we said we want on during that time as a minimum. So on Thursday here, I purposely only scheduled one person from 6 to 6:15, so you can see this red arrow indicating, hey, 2 is the minimum we allow in your franchise group or in that store. You only schedule 1, you're below that. So it's a visual clue to you. So audit is now completed. You can go back and tweak your schedule, make whatever changes. But if you make any change on that schedule, you have to run audit again. I'm going to return to the schedule. You can print this out too. You can email this. You know, Bob, if you want a copy of the audit every week, they can email that to you directly out of the schedule. You'll get a PDF of this that you can open up on your computer, and you can look at see at a glance what they're scheduling.
Fantastic.
Yeah, return to schedule. I'm just going to return to schedule, okay? And so now, because audit finished, I got the audit page, it finished, I can now publish the schedule if I so choose. So under the scheduling tab, there is an area right over here called distribute, okay? So you can print the schedule, which is the first button. You can email the schedule. And when I say email the schedule, I mean email the entire schedule. And that is typically used by above store personnel, for above store personnel. If I click on that, Bob, I can email you, or your GM can email you an exact copy of this schedule. It's in a more printer-friendly format without all the fancy colors and all that, but you'll be able to see exactly who's on and when they're on. It'll come to you in a PDF. Then there's a button called Print Individual. That's if you want to, let's say Sally comes in every day. What do I work today? Well, you can just print out her copy of her schedule and say, here you go, Sally, here's your schedule for the upcoming week. You don't have to come in every day to look. And then the last one is the email text button. So if I click email text, I can now email or text a single employee their schedule or all employees. And if I click all employees, the software then will just go through every single one of your employees. It's going to look, hey, how does that person want their schedule? If it's email, they're going to get an email with their schedule. If it's text, they're going to get a text with their schedule. If it's print, then nothing happens for that employee. It's just ignored because it's assumed they're going to look at the schedule on the bulletin board. And then there's a checkbox that says include employees with no hours. If somebody isn't scheduled, you can uncheck that and they won't get a copy of it, but I always suggest leave it checked because you want to let that employee know, hey, I don't have any hours for you this week. So they'll just get an empty schedule and they'll know. So if I click OK, then that process happens and it probably takes 15 to 30 seconds, and then all of your employees will have been notified and have a personalized copy of their schedule. And a lot of people use that and they really like it. So you've printed the schedule, you can put it on the bulletin board, you email the schedule, and if I click email schedule, I'll just show you here what happens. I have a mini email program built into this that will send the schedule, and let me just wait for that to open. And you're just presented with a screen that says, okay, who do you want the schedule to go to? You can type in the email address, and then it automatically will put the subject, and I just use my hometown Maple Grove, and it'll say weekly work schedule 2/5/2019, and then there'll be a PDF attached to that. And let me show you what that PDF looks like. Are you able to see that?
Yep.
This is what you'd receive, okay? It's more streamlined, which is really kind of what you want when you get it via email. But it'll show you that entire schedule. It'll show you the number of hours, and at the very bottom, or on page 2, has the summary as well. This gets used a lot in a lot of franchise groups. It's mandatory that the owner or store supervisor receive a copy of the schedule every week, and this is how they do it. They just send it right out of the software when the schedule is done. I'll close that. I'll click cancel. Okay, so that's how you publish the schedule. Once it's done, you go into you run your audit, and then you go into the distribute functions, and you can print, email, and email/text all of your employees. All right. All right. We talked about these little flags here. These are called real-time flags, meaning that you had a violation, or you violated their availability, or something that you have set up for that employee you forgot about. It lets you know. And it's a yellow flag. If you have a miner working for you, under 16, there would be what we call a job code 2. I'm trying to see if I have any here. Thought I did. A minor employee, if you violate their rigid requirements of, not past 7 and no more than 3 hours and not more than 18 hours a week, you'll also see those flags for a minor employee. But those flags, here's one, Kelsey. Oops, sorry. Kelsey, all right. So Kelsey, I'm going to schedule Kelsey. Let's schedule her from 4:30 to maybe 8:30 or something that's obviously a violation. Okay, you see that flag there on the out time? That indicates, again, something's wrong. Audit is going to catch that. If you don't change it now, it's telling you audit is going to flag this. But I'm flagging it for you now so you can fix it before audit catches it. But it's a red flag. Okay, a red flag means you got to fix it. When audit catches it, audit is not going to give you the ability to ignore and override it because it's a minor employee and it's not optional. It's required. You have to change it. If you don't change that time on that timeline, you cannot publish the schedule. So red flags are required. Yellow flags are optional. You'll have the ability to override that. So anytime you see a red flag, you might as well fix it now because audit is not going to let you complete the audit until you fix it anyway. So that's why we have that there, is to give you a heads up ahead of time. All right. Now, when you first do a schedule, it's a process. It's a few steps. And once you've done 2 or 3 schedules, you'll have that process committed to memory. But when you're new, I understand it, takes a little bit of getting used to something new. So what I've done is I've built in what I call a schedule wizard. Okay? So under processes, there's a wizard here. There's several buttons. One is the schedule wizard. One is called clear hours, which will clear all your hours off the schedule. One is a sales forecasting button. One is a button called process request off. So all those requests off that you have that you've entered in for your employees will get processed first. Kind of like manually doing the schedule, going through the envelope, pulling out all the days off requests, writing them on the schedule. Well, the program will do that for you. And then there's also a process can't work. So any employee on their availability profile, if they have a can't work, those get processed so that you don't inadvertently schedule them. They'll all get populated on your schedule. Well, when you do a new schedule, there's several steps. So the schedule wizard will do that for you. So I'm going to click the schedule wizard, and we're going to do a new schedule here. So the schedule wizard pops up, step by step for starting a new schedule. Clear hours from the current schedule. Underneath it says lock any hours you don't want cleared. So I have William locked, and there may be some others I can't see right now from down below, but I have William locked. So the button is green and it says do it. So I click on it. So, okay. As it says, hey, this is going to clear all your hours. Are you sure? Yes. So it's going to go through and clear all the hours off the schedule, other than the hours that you have locked with that red lock button. Those will stay put. Takes just a moment. And then once that step has been completed, the wizard then goes on to the next step. Typically, the clearing takes about 5 seconds. Again, I got a slow machine here. All right, so hours are cleared. Just hours have been cleared, okay? Next step is set date for new schedule. So you click do it. You get your calendar. Well, it's going to pre-select the first day of the next week for you. Because today is the 29th, it's selecting the 5th of February, which is the first day of the next week for this group. I'm gonna keep it on that date for now. Click OK. Making sure that the sales history is up to date. And then the next step is it talks about sales forecasting. Sales forecasting is kind of an important part of doing a good schedule. It's only as good as the projections that you're making, as you know. All right, hold on one second here. It says next step is save new schedule for first time. So the schedule we're working on is the schedule that we had been working on is for 122. We're going to work on a new one. So I click do it and I get a save screen, and the save screen has 3 options. Save the schedule for the first time. I've never saved this schedule before. Save the schedule because I've been working on it and I've saved it once before, but I want to save it again, or I want to exit the program. Well, this is a new schedule, so I'm working on a new schedule for a new week, and it automatically puts the name as Weekly Work Schedule 2/5/2019, and I'll click OK. It's going to just take a minute and save that schedule. So the schedule that we had before we cleared all the hours was 1/22/2019. That schedule still exists, but we now have a new copy called 2/5/2019, and those hours are all cleared. All right, next step is process any days off requests. Okay, I think we had one in there for Jeff on the 6th. So if I click do it, it just gives you a heads up saying, hey, if you didn't process these days off requests before you started the schedule, you might inadvertently write request off over a time that you've already have scheduled. Well, that's kind of the idea. We want to make sure that that time off gets processed. So click yes. It's going through all of your employees. It's going through the envelope, okay? And it's pulling out any notes that you got. Well, there's only one note in there today. Well, maybe there's more, but only one note that applies to this week. 1 day off request processed. Click OK. And notice under Jeff, it now says request off. Now, I said that the comments were optional on when you process that, when you enter that request off. But if you enter a reason why, then if you don't have to go back into the data card to find out, well, why did Jeff want that day off? Because you see a little triangle in the corner here. All you do is hover your mouse over it, and it pops up doctor appointment, so you know right away what it was. If you hadn't done that, if you hadn't put that comment in there, then nothing would populate there, obviously. Process any can't work days, which comes from the profile for all your employees. If there's days they just can't work because they have kids at home or whatever. So I'm going to click do it. It's going to tell me again, if you didn't do this before you started scheduling, you could overwrite some of your hours. I'm going to say yes. Now it's going through, and 1 can't work request processed. Now, it still says request off, but if you hover over it, it doesn't say doctor appointment. It's going to say profile can't work, meaning this is coming from the profile. Last thing then is enter sales forecast for new week. If I click do it, don't be overwhelmed by this screen. It's actually there's a lot of stuff on here, but it's if you're have data coming from the cloud, which Bob you do, and I know StarCorp does, this populates all your historical sales. So the columns in gray and white are breakdowns of your hourly sales for the same week last year, 6-week average last year, 3-week average, this year, 3-week average this year, and the latest completed week this year. So that is there kind of for you to see how have our sales been? What was it like last year? How did we just finish this last week? So that you can come up with a forecast for this week. And the forecast is in yellow, okay? So anything in yellow you can type in, you can change, or do whatever, okay? If you want to adjust a forecast, rather than typing all the hours for every day for 7 days, which is a lot of work, there's a button up here called Apply Percent. So if I click it, let's just say that we've been trending up, we've been up maybe 2%, and I think I want the forecast to be up maybe 2% over last week or over last year. All I have to do is just type in 2.0, and then it says, what do you want to apply that 2% to? Do you want to apply that 2% to last year's same day? Do you want to apply it to this year's 6-week average? Do you want to apply it to this year's 3-week average? Or do you want to apply it to this year's last week? You just tell it, hey, I want 2% higher than this year last week. And then the last thing is, do you want to apply this to the entire day, or do you want to apply it to each hour? And each hour is preferred. So I'm going to click each hour. And then, hey, do you want to apply this 2% to all 7 days? And if you say yes, then it'll get applied across the board. If not, then you'd have to do that for each day. There's a button for each day. But I'm going to say, yeah, give me a 2% bump from last week. Click OK, and forecast adjustments are done. So what happened here? Let me click close. All the in yellows got bumped 2% for each day of the week. And where does that show up? I'm going to click return to schedule, and that shows up at the bottom of your schedule under forecast. Now you don't have to use the wizard to get into that tool. This is typically the process. So in blue is our forecast that just came across from that forecasting page. Okay, and then if I needed to go back into it, I can just click the sales forecast button. So now you can start scheduling. You've cleared your hours, you've made sure you've locked your hours, you've cleared your hours, you've saved the schedule with a new week, you've changed the date, saved it with a new week, you've processed your days off, you've processed your request off, you can't work, you've adjusted your forecast, and now you're ready to schedule. And that's the process really for starting a new schedule. Questions? A lot of stuff, huh? There's
a lot of stuff.
A lot of stuff. I've probably covered 20% of what this thing is capable of doing. There are some above store things that can be done. I'm going to briefly go into a couple of those things. But before I do, there's a very useful feature called At a Glance. It's a button on the admin toolbar. If I click it, what I get is a floating window. And the reason it's called At a Glance is because it's going to show me what I'm doing as I'm scheduling in real time. Okay? So right now, I'm on Tuesday. I'm working on Tuesday. Okay? And it's showing me, well, how many cashiers, cooks, drive-through, bakers, by position, do I have scheduled in 15-minute increments, okay? Or not specified, meaning I didn't specify a position. So I have William working from 5 until 4. So I have a 1 all the way across under not specified because I don't have a job specified. That's what not specified means. If I change him to cook, for instance, then as I update hours, he will transfer to cook. See now, you see that now he's under cook, one cook, and I can scroll across for the entire day, and I have one person scheduled right now. So as I add people, if I have this window open, this will update in real time. The other thing that it'll do at the bottom here, it give you a summary of your labor guidelines, what you have scheduled, what you're allowed for that day part based upon your labor chart, whether or not you're over and under. So you can see at a glance as you're making the schedule if you're on target or if you're starting to exceed your allowed hours. And you can do that for each day of the week. You just select a different day. And you can zoom in larger if you wanted to see it a little bit better. How's that, everybody? Can you see it better now?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So, so these 6 positions, if you've defined them, will be populated. And they will populate, if you've selected a job here, it'll show you up here what you have working. Okay. And down here, it'll give you in real time information on hours that you have worked. Well, this is the GM. We have it set so the GM doesn't count, so that's why there's no hours right now. It says 0. Okay? Really handy tool to help keep you on track. After all, the whole idea is to, keep a handle on your labor guidelines and make sure that you're not violating your labor guidelines. So be sure that you use that as you're scheduling. All right, I'm going to go into this button called Setup. This is where all the stuff happens, and there's a lot of stuff that can be set. Don't be intimidated by it. We're going to just set some basics. As you get better at this, you'll start to use some of these things, and there's just a lot of stuff there. This first tab basically is just your store. You set up your store. You set up your unit number or whatever. On the right-hand side, this is where you set your store hours, opening and closing times. There are some templates pre-built. So if I click on that, I have 4 different templates for opening and closing times. If this doesn't match with what you do, just pick the one that's closest and apply it. Maybe this is the one that's closest, so I'll hit apply. So it'll fill that in for me on that tab, and then just once that's done, then you can come in here and tweak it. Just use these arrows to change the times, and then click accept to save those times, and that'll be the times that your store then will use for opening and closing and turning buttons green and so forth. The next tab is email settings. You have to set up, and I will help. I'll work with the GMs. I'll get all this set up for you guys. You need an email account to be able to publish the schedule via email or text. So typically, you just use the store's email account, and then it'll use that information to send schedules to employees, to supervisors, to owners, that kind of thing. Next tab is labor settings. This is where you use enter your labor charts. And again, I'll make sure that your 2 stores will use that chart that you sent me. I have it ready to go. And it's just a matter of importing it into the software. But it's ready to go. Then there's hours, it's called hours tracking. We have job codes, and job codes are in that data manager. Job code 1 would be an hourly employee. Job code 5 would be a supervisor. An 8 is an assistant, and a 9 is a GM. And if you have positions whose hours don't count, this is where you set that. If everybody counts except the GM, then you set this to 9. This is the minimum job code for hours not to count on the schedule. So if you set this to 9, that means everybody's hours count except the GM. Okay? There's an area called hours for closing. Okay? So we have a shift on here called close. Well, the software doesn't know what that means. It knows that we close at 11 o'clock. It doesn't know how long it takes to clean up. So this is where you tell it, hey, anytime there's a shift scheduled to close, add half an hour, 45 minutes, add an hour, add 2 hours to the shift for cleaning time. So that, again, because not everybody goes home at 11, you have to account for those hours or you're going to be over. This is where you tell the software how long it takes. It be a quarter hour. Again, it can go all the way up to 3 hours. Heaven's sakes, let's hope it doesn't take them 3 hours to clean the store. But it gives you the flexibility. Talk about paid breaks. It defaults to no. It's set to no. And here's where you can tell it how many hours before a unpaid break. If it's 5 hours, you can set it here. If it's different, you can change it. How long is the unpaid break? And do you have an exemption to paid breaks? In other words, does job code 8 assistant manager automatically get paid for his or her break? If so, you can exempt them by saying anybody with a job code 8 or higher, don't deduct 30 minutes from their time. You can set that here. So lots of flexibility in here. Peak period tracking. This is where the program tracks how many bodies do I have on during my busiest times at breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And you can tell the program my peak times on weekdays are 7 to 9, 11 to 1, 5 to 7, or whatever you want it to be. Okay, you can change that. If your peak time is only till 8:30, you can set it to 8:30, and you can tell it, all right, how do I count people that are working? How do I consider them as working during the peak time? So you can set this as a percentage. So if you say 100%, that means that employee has to be on the entire peak period from 7 to 9. Maybe they work 5 to 1, so obviously from 7 to 9 they're there. They count as 1. But maybe they only work from 7:30 to 9. If you still want them to count, they're not working the entire shift. Maybe they're only there 75% of the time. Or you can set it to 50 that says, if they're working for at least 1 hour between 7 and 9, I count them as being there during the peak period. So it defaults to 50%. You can set that percentage to whatever you want. And it basically refers to how much time does that worker have to be on during this time period to be counted as a person working during the busy time. And because shift busy times are different on the weekends, you can set a separate start and end time for peak periods for the weekend. Maybe the peak period, breakfast comes later on Saturday. The rush is, maybe they're 8:30 till 10. That's your busy time on the weekend. So you can set it separately from weekdays. Lastly, this is minimum staffing, which is shown to you on the audit. There is what we call a master time, meaning, hey, never fall below two employees ever on the schedule. Never. Or whatever. Between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. or 11 p.m., you can set it what you want, the absolute minimum number of bodies. Whether they count or not on the schedule is irrelevant. It's bodies in the store. It's going to count the GM also. But, so this is the minimum. Now, if you have specific times of the day that you say, hey, I never want to have less than 6 people on at lunch. Well, you can set that. There's a time window. You can say from 11, but from 11 to 1, I want no less than 6 bodies on, or whatever number you want. So I'll just set this to 6, okay? So now what it's saying is, all day long, I want never less than 2, but from 11 to 1, I want never less than 6. So the other times of the day, it's going to look for 2, but during this time, it's going to look for 6. And if you want more, you can say, hey, from 5 to 7, I want no less than 4. Believe it or not, I got a franchise group in your neck of the woods that uses these also over here. You have 9, you can set 9 different time windows and 9 different minimum number of employees. So the program will look for that, In any time window that does not fall into one of these 9, it will look for the master number of 2. So you can fine-tune this to your heart's content. And on the audit, your managers will see that. They'll say, wait a minute, Bob says I can't have less than 3. I only scheduled 2. There's going to be a red arrow on that audit form for that time period saying, hey, you have less on that than are required by my owner. Okay, so as you play with this, you'll start to use this. And like I said, I've got some groups that really use this quite a bit. There's a tab called Users. Okay, this is where you actually set up users. So there are 2 kinds of users. There's a primary user and there's a secondary user. There's only one primary, and that's typically the GM. And they have access to most things, not all things. So I have the person here. I can then set their information. I can add additional users. For instance, here, if I edit the user, Aaron, in this case, I can then set a password for Aaron that she uses to log into the program. Okay. If I want to add a new user, I can add myself as a secondary user, and I'll just put in a password. All right, click Save, and then they get some default permissions, the things that they have access to. Okay, and there are a lot of stores where maybe the assistant manager or even the shift supervisor in some stores are doing the schedule. But you don't want them to have access to sensitive stuff like wages. You can give them access to the program. They can do the schedule or whatever, but they can't get into all the areas. There's another tab here called Permissions. Under that tab, there are 3 categories of permissions. Data Manager. This is where you set up your employees. Okay. If I click on Data Manager, now I can see Mike has access to, and I just follow the line. So I have a check mark here. It says I have access to adding a new hire. I have access to modifying an existing employee. So anything that is a check mark, I have access to. If there's no check mark, I don't have access to it. So attendance, I don't have access to the attendance tab. I don't have access to documentation tab. If you want them to have access, then you just check the box, and now I have access to that particular area of the schedule. If I try to access it, the program will say, your permissions do not allow you to access the attendance tab. Then there's the setup. That's what we're in now. This is and there are a number of tabs here. And again, there's some default permissions for secondary users. But if you don't want them to be able to mess with labor settings or other settings, you just don't give them access. For instance, by default, the secondary user doesn't have access to labor options. There's probably no need for them to have access to that. They could inadvertently, change a setting that messes up your labor tracking. They also don't have access to the administration tab, but neither does the GM. The administration tab I'm going to show you in a second. If you want them to have access, there's another login for you separately, Bob, or whoever the administrator is going to be for this. There's another account that you can log into that there's some things that you can set. Now, I'm logged in at the highest level, so I have access back, so I can show you these things. Then there's an Other tab. The Other tab deals with things like sensitive data. So you notice by default, the secondary user has no access to that. Social Security numbers or wage information, previous employee lookups, wage changes, those kinds of things, they have no access to. If you want them to have access to it, fine, but by default they don't, and that's to keep snooping and prying eyes out. All right, that's permissions. Then there's some program options. Here's where you can set your day parts. If they conform to normal hours, normal day parts that we've all become accustomed to, then you should be fine using those. If you have different day parts, you can change your day parts in here. There's some other options like, we talked about the real-time flags. You can get a flag or you can get a stoplight symbol. If you want a stoplight symbol instead of a flag, you can change it here. Right now I have the training badges set to red. If you like blue better, then I'll just change. I'll click that button, and now notice all my little symbols change to blue. Or if you like black, you can change them to black. There's some other options in here. I really don't need to get into them now. They're not critical to getting started. One of the things about the save reminders, this is where you can say, hey, don't remind me quite so often about saving the schedule. Maybe I only want it medium instead of high. It won't nag you quite as often. So that's where you set that. These last two tabs, by default, the GM typically can't get into these. You need a special login for that, and I'll make sure you have that. But this is where you can set up some stuff for the boss. Okay, that's for you, for whoever's administering this. And you can, for instance, we had, with the Affordable Care Act, we had the ability to enforce a limit of number of hours because we wanted to keep them under 30. We can set a limit of a hard limit of hours and the number, and then if you schedule somebody above that, program is going to have a problem with it. It's not going to let you do it. You can't publish a schedule until you fix it. That's how we were dealing with the Affordable Care Act. Bob, is that still an issue? Do we still have to do that now, or not? The limit hours? I don't think we do, right?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, if that ever comes back, I mean, it's there. We built that. We put that in there because there was an issue and people needed to do that. There's settings like how many characters your passwords need to be, 5, 6, or 8, and whether or not it needs to have a capital letter. You can, the employee setup, remember I said that you can set up just the bare minimum stuff, the name and date of birth and all that. You can actually compel the store to fill all of that in by checking this box. Now everything on the new hire form has to be filled out. So if that's something that you want them to do, then we just check this box. Sales forecasting, whether or not to require hourly forecasts. And typically that is when you're manually forecasting. You've got the luxury of having data coming from the cloud. So it's not necessary, but the benefit of doing hourly forecasts, which is what we do by default if you're using cloud data, is that at-a-glance form then populates all of your day parts with actual hours scheduled and allowed and shows you your variance as you're scheduling. If you do just a daily forecast, it doesn't have the ability to do that because it doesn't know how to allocate those hours to the day parts. So then here's a feature that some people use. If you want somebody to be notified when the GM fills in information about sick and tardy, let's say you want to know when there's employees that are no-shows. So you can check the enabled column here, and let's say I want 3 no-shows in 10 days. I want an email to be sent to wherever. You type in the email address. And it can be multiple email addresses. You can put a comma in between them. And what will happen is if you're using the documentation for attendance, when there's an employee that's been a no-show, the number of times and the number of days that you have set, you're going to get an email. You're going to say so-and-so at such-and-such store has now been a no-show 3 times in the last 10 days or 3 times in the last 7 days. Because that's kind of unacceptable. And maybe you want to know, well, how come we keep allowing this employee to no-show without doing something about it? So you can be notified if you want. So you can be notified automatically on no-shows. You can be notified of unexcused absences, on tardiness or sickness, number of times and number of days. You can set it to whatever you want, and you can be notified of that. You can also be notified if somebody changes wages on the schedule by more than a certain amount. So if somebody goes from $10.50 an hour to $11.50 an hour, and you have set in here, hey, anytime it's more than 50 cents or 25 cents or whatever, I want to know. You're going to get an email. And this email will come if the GM knows that this is happening and they unplug the internet when they're doing it so that the email doesn't go out. Guess again. The email will go out when the computer is plugged back in or the internet is plugged back in. So they can't circumvent this. But it's there for information, and it's caught some things that normally wouldn't get caught. Another one here is termination. You terminate somebody for cause. Maybe you want an email because there's a function on here to terminate somebody, and one of the options is cause, and maybe you want to know about that. So this is the kind of the boss screen that GMs and the secondary users do not have access to, but you would. And then the last one is the database. This is the cloud, and this is pre-set up for you. You don't have to do anything there. This is just basically how the program gets all of your sales data. And I'll have all that working for you. So that's the setup. That's the setup page. There's another tab here if you want different colors. Maybe on the 4th of July you're feeling patriotic and you want the schedule when you're doing it to be red, white, and blue. Then just click that red, white, and blue button, click OK, give the program a couple of moments here to do its gyrations, and then now you have a red, white, and blue schedule. So you have seven different options. Obviously that day I had too much time on my hands when I did this. So lots of configuration. There's just an awful lot that you can do. If you want more real estate space on your screen, if you don't want this third line and you want some extra space, there's a button on top called Maximum Screen. So if I click that, now what will happen is I'm going to see more employees on my schedule at one time, but I won't see that third line underneath. See that? It's called Maximum Screen. Things kind of collapsed a little bit. The stuff on top is still there, but it collapsed onto one line instead of two. So now you have, you can see more. Okay. By the way, these light blue boxes, these fields are for anything that you want to comment about that affects that day's business. It's just an information screen. Like here, school, basketball bus, 8 p.m. Whatever. If you got something going on that day, you can just type it in here as a reminder when the schedule is published. Reports, all kinds of reports. You can play with these as much as you like. You can get a complete employee listing, a call list. If you track reviews, you can get an upcoming employee reviews sheet. So at the beginning of the month, you can run, hey, what performance reviews are due this month? And it'll print them out for you. If you got birthdays coming up, again, beginning of the month, you get a list of employee birthdays to help remind you or to celebrate employee birthdays. Employment anniversary report, you can get that. Length of service report. If your data manager has all the accurate hire dates in them, you can get a length of service report for all of your employees. Turnover. The program will track your turnover as well. You can get an annual turnover report, monthly turnover report. When you terminate somebody, the program will have a history. So I'm going to click OK to see if I don't have any archived employees. Sorry. Let me just log back in. As you terminate employees, the program will keep track of all the terminated employees, and you'll be able to go back and look up any history on any employees. Say somebody worked for you 3 years ago and you've been using this, but maybe you have a different GM there. You can go back and look that employee up and find out when they worked for you, why they left. You'll be able to see all of their attendance if you track it, all of their documentation, and then you can make an informed decision about whether or not you want to hire that person back. So it's all in here when you terminate people. Let's see here. And employee availability report. You can get a report of all of your employees and their availabilities that you have set up for them. You guys still use the, what do they call it, the Ross chart?
Yep.
Yeah? Okay, scheduled employees, sales and labor breakdown for a single day. So let's just say I'm going to do Tuesday here. I really don't have anything scheduled, so it's kind of silly, but I'll do it anyway. But what would happen is you would get all of your employees that are scheduled that day on the left-hand side, okay? What they're working. If they're in bold, that means they're a GM, or I mean they're a management person, consider management, with a job code of higher than 5 or higher. And then you would get your forecasted sales, okay? And if you had filled out your schedule, it would have all of your scheduled hours, allowed hours filled in, and then the actual sales are blank. You could print these out for all 7 days, keep them on the front line, and then they can, as the day unfolds, they can kind of fill in. Well, I forecasted $154 for business that day. I only did 78, and the next hour I only did 42. Well, that's probably a clue that maybe they need to start thinking about cutting hours. So real handy, have these 7 sheets you print them out at the beginning of the week, you put them on the front line on a clipboard, and then they can keep track of their readings, compare it to what they're forecasting, and make an informed, smart decision about the amount of labor that they have on that day. There's nothing on here because we haven't really scheduled anything yet other than the GM. And GM in this store doesn't count, so there's no hours for that GM.
And what is that? What was that called again?
That's under reports. Yeah, I'll show you.
Okay.
And you can print that, or you can email that also, even if you want a copy of it to go somewhere. So under reports, scheduled employees, sales and labor breakdown.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. And again, there's more. My recommendation is you get a few weeks under your belt, get comfortable with it, and then we can take a look at some other things and other features. One last thing I want to show you here. We talk about request off. You can go into an employee's data card, and when they have a request off, and you can fill that in. There's another place that you can do that too. It's under calendars called request off calendar. And what this is for is when you can use it for a single employee, or you can use it for when you have multiple employees asking for the same day off. Prom, you got 11 employees that want the prom night off. Well, instead of going to each individual employee, you can go into the request off calendar and accomplish the same thing. Maybe. Slow computer today. Come on. And it allows you, there it is. So let's just say January 26th, okay? Everything's green right now. It means nobody's asked for that day off right now. Yellow would mean that there's some that have asked for the day off. Red would mean many, 10 or more have asked for the day off. So you can see right away. So I'll just double click a date, okay? And, no, sorry. It says you can't put in a request off for a date in the past unless you know how to do time travel. So let's go to February. And let's go February 19th. I'll double click that. And now I get a form where now I can say, I just click. Say, okay, Mary Oil, reason, prom, or whatever. I'll just make that up. And now Mark, mustard. It doesn't have to be the same reason. It's just that you've got several employees that want that same day off. So you can do that without having to go right into their data card to do it, because it's going to save it in the same area. So now I save that, okay? And now February 19th, notice that I have the 6th, so that was actually the Jeff that had the 6th off. And the 19th is yellow now. If I double click on it, again, it's showing me now who's requested that off. Now I can't, once I've set it, I can't go in here and delete this from here. You have to go to that individual employee's data card to remove them. But you can add more to it. So you can see kind of at a glance that, hey, we've got a bunch of requests off going on here, 6, 19. And if it's red, that means you've got a boatload of people that have asked for it off. And you're probably going to want to limit adding any more. So that's a quick way of adding multiple people to the same day without having to go into the data manager. Okay? Last thing, and then we're done. I want to go into the data manager just for a moment because I've been talking about terminations, okay? When you're done with somebody, I'm gonna terminate this person right here. So I'll select them. It's going to pull up all their information. And then once I have that information in front of me, I have some options on the bottom here. You know, I can print it out, I can email it, I can deactivate the employee, meaning that they're still working for you, they're just not active right now. Maybe they're off to school or whatever. I can actually transfer them to another store, and by transfer that means if I click transfer, it's going to generate a file that the other store in your company can have, and they can add them to their schedule by just transferring them in. So it's going to take all of their information, their attendance, their work history, everything, and that'll be encrypted in a file that the other store can then import and have available to them. So they don't have to type all that information in. But to terminate, I click the terminate button. It says this will terminate the employee. Do you want to proceed? I click yes. And it's going to say, okay, there's some things to fill out. Rehire recommended. I'll say, okay. What's the termination date? Today. Did they get proper notice? Yes or no? The reason you have this is because that's going to get archived. So when you go back, maybe look this employee up 2 years from now because he decided he wanted to come back and work for you, you have that available to you. I'll say, yes, he gave proper notice. What's the reason for termination? There's a list of reasons there. So I'll just say other employment. If you terminate them, there's a field called when is their final check due, immediately or normal. And that's really more for if you're using a payroll service or central office that you can notify them that, hey, I terminated them, I need their check right away. Most of the time you're going to click normal, meaning they're going to get their final check with their next payroll. And then you have to then either print this form out and put it in their file, or you can email this form to to an office or to a payroll company, but you can't terminate it until you've done one or the other. So I'm just going to hit print. I'll freak out my wife because she's going to get a termination report now on her computer. She's working in the other room, but so I'll just click print. It says authorized by, I'll just say Mike. And there's a form that it generates that it prints out. All right, it's going to print that. Okay, and once I've done that, I can still change my mind and click cancel, and that is like nothing happened. But now this terminate and archive employee button lights up red, and now the employee will be removed from the schedule. If there's any hours, they'll be removed, and the data manager will be cleared out for that employee. That slot will be available on the schedule now, and all of the employee's information will be archived. All right, so now it's finishing up, and when I say archived, I mean it's under reports, where we were looking at all the reports, and there is a previous employee lookup. If I click that, now it's not going to say, hey, there aren't any in there because we just added one. And now I'll be able to go back and get some pertinent information about this employee.